Hello, I'm Randy Swallow. Welcome to COVID Conversations. On this show, we'll meet two people who have been stricken with the COVID-19 virus, how they dealt with COVID-19, and how it's affecting their lives, family, friends, and work. Joining us today on COVID Conversations is Liliana Trejo Venegas and Raquel Cruz Juarez. Thank you both for being here and sharing your stories. Raquel, first of all, I guess it's been about a year since you contracted COVID. Why did you get testing? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I got COVID around December, so right peak of holiday season, right when everybody was getting ready to, share Christmas or holiday season. I ended up getting tested in the middle of December because I remember very vividly on a Saturday, I could not taste my granola bar anymore and I couldn't smell anything. And I was in the car and I told my partner, no, this isn't the cold or the flu, and I think I have COVID and I think I have to go and get tested. And I had been really good about keeping to myself and to my family, and I got a COVID test as soon as possible. But during that time, it was right after Thanksgiving, so everybody was trying to go get a COVID test. And I got results within 3 to 4 days, which is actually the longest. And then sure enough, I tested positive. So it was really honestly just like the lack of taste and smell that got me to go get tested.
And how about you, Lily?
So I went to go get tested after my mom started showing symptoms. So I live in a multi-generational household. It is my mom, my dad, my older sister, myself, and my son. And once my mom started showing symptoms, she is never really the type of person to get a cold or the flu. Like, her immune system is just she's very lucky with that. And so immediately, especially because of my then not even yet 2-year-old son, I, made the choice to pack everyone in the car and go and wait in line for what must have been, it must have been about 2 hours. We went to go get tested at the Texas station. And yeah, I remember we woke up like even an hour before they even opened. And even though we were there waiting an hour before they opened, it was a very, very long wait, but we got the test done. And by that point, we had my mom self-isolating in her room with the windows open, ventilated, and trying to avoid contact with her. But although we tried everything that we could to, minimize the spread, it still spread to everyone in my family. Thankfully, the symptoms were not terrible. It really was just kind of like cold symptoms. I had no symptoms whatsoever. So we were very lucky in that sense. But I could definitely tell that my dad, who's in his 70s now, was incredibly stressed. He was just, terrified because so many of his friends and some of our family members who live in Mexico who had contracted the virus had died. And so he was very, very stressed out. And so I kind of took the executive decision of not telling everybody in the family that we had COVID. I don't know how I pulled it off, but I pretty much just told them, like, the tests are inconclusive, and so we're going to have to go back in 2 weeks to get it done again. And just, kind of on a hope and a prayer, like making sure that everybody was safe. I bought, everybody the oxygen marker things. Just really trying everything that I could, because although it didn't strike us in the way that it has, other families, I was very well aware of how serious it could have turned.
And how about you, Raquel? Then you came back with a positive test. Pick it up from there.
Yeah, so after I came back tested positive, I knew immediately I had to tell my partner. Fortunately, he did not test positive at all, which is very interesting. By that time, we had shared, we lived in an apartment at the time. It was just him and I and my dog. But we had been going over to his family's home, similar to Liliana, multi-generational. I'm an immigrant. His parents are immigrants. So this ability of like being able to disconnect from our families was just a concept that was just not something that was necessarily possible for a lot of Latino families. We still had to help them out with unemployment. We still had to help them out with different variety of, just everyday errands. And so they all got tested and they all tested positive. I tested positive and my partner was the only one that didn't. And so, unlike Liliana, I did have a few symptoms. For me, exhaustion was one of the things that really, I was just distraught, truthfully. Fortunately, it was during the time that I had paid time off. I was about to get into the holidays, so I didn't stress out too much about taking time off. So I was pretty much isolated for 2 weeks or so. I felt very guilty because my partner was also isolated and he took care of me, but I was exhausted. I would get up from my room and try to go to the kitchen, and just doing that, I felt, after you go and you play sports and then you're just kind of tired and you want to go home and shower, like I felt like that all the time. Also mentally, it was really getting to me because I felt guilty. I felt dirty even. It's something that we don't talk about, is that stigma. Even though I had been taking care of myself and I was arguably the most paranoid / the most prepared person in my family, I still ended up getting COVID. But I think one of the most detrimental symptom that I had was the lack of taste and smell. And just like Liliana mentioned, nobody in my family has passed away or has been touched by the COVID in such a negative way. But to this day, even almost a year later, I still can't taste things that I appreciated or liked. And so I survived on saltines and Gatorade and water for 2-3 weeks even. And it just, quite frankly, it was just horrible. A lot of our culture, particularly, I'm an immigrant from Guatemala, like I mentioned, has a lot of food and spices and things that really bring us back home and that we enjoy and love. But COVID took that away from me. COVID took joy away from me. It took sharing the holidays with my partner. Like, we were just like in bed all day, and like, I'm thankful I had somebody there to take care of me. But that's what was really horrible about the virus, was not being in this like weird space where you had symptoms, but they weren't as bad as other folks, or, you weren't feeling well. Even after I tested negative, I still felt very tired, like very much like I had finished a soccer meet or something. So that's pretty much how my symptoms occurred. So I'm finding similarities in your story.
And you mentioned in some of the food, you said cilantro. You can't taste cilantro, and it's
Yes.
everyone has a love-hate with cilantro, and that's
true.
one of the most flavor-forward types of food there is.
Yeah, so a lot of the foods that my mom prepares, for example, have a lot of cilantro. Love cilantro. To this day, I can't taste it. That's probably how folks who always say that it tastes like soap tasted like to them. But it's really sad, because I feel like I was robbed of a piece of my culture. And on top of that, not only are we a multi-generational family as well, but my parents don't live here. They're retired in Guatemala. And so not only having COVID, but living in a space, not knowing how your parents are doing. My parents are also older, and I'm here with COVID. It was just a lot during that space. And this was before the vaccines, right? Like, this is when we were having a lot of conversations about vaccines. So I just felt that, I don't know, I just felt incredibly guilty and then sad, right? That I couldn't have the food that I like. And to this day, I can't really drink coffee or have peanut butter or cilantro. Some red meat, it tastes nasty, quite frankly.
For the record, I love cilantro.
Me too, I used to.
Apparently it's a genetic thing, so who knows?
Liliana, how many days was it for you then, the initial for you and your family?
So when I finally made an appointment to go back and get tested, it was 14 days after the first test. And by that time, everybody tested negative. So that was a huge relief. And again, like, my mom was only sick for maybe like 4 days, and it was kind of the same symptoms that you were describing, where like she was in bed. Like, I was even checking her blood pressure because she does have some blood pressure issues, but not enough so that she needs prescription medicine for it. It's just something that she needs to look out for. But it was, I was very worried because at the time we also didn't know that much about what symptoms could be. It was like, it could have something to do with your lungs, your heart, this, that, the other thing. And I was like, I'm not a nurse. I don't know anything about what to do with this. And so it really was just natural remedies that kept it going in my household.
So you didn't take any other medications or treatments? Anyone else in your family?
So my dad was very afraid because he does take blood pressure medication. And so even though he was just a bit congested, he opted to not take congestion medication because he was afraid of how it might react. Also, at this time, it was impossible to get a doctor's appointment or even try to call in to get, something for your doctor to let you know, like, yes, you can mix this medication with this, or whatever. Again, my family is hardly ever sick. Like, we're just the type of family that, when you're sick, you just take a little oregano tea and like, boom, you're done. So that's why, yeah, we decided to stay with the natural route. And thankfully it was, it was enough to help them through it.
Raquel, did you take any treatment or any medications?
Yeah, so I had like a variety of things that I had taken. And what I did is towards the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic was really at its peak, I was on social media and I found a lot of threads on Twitter and Facebook and stories of people sharing what they were doing. Because I mean, even to this day, we still don't know exactly how to get rid of COVID. And so I saved all of those just in case. And I found a combination of a variety of things, from natural remedies to things like elderberry syrup, zinc, vitamin C, like I kept that, and I made sure I Amazoned everything and had it delivered to my door, which, by the way, at that time, there was a lot of like scarcity of a lot of these medications. And I mean, at the time, I think that we were all just trying to survive and figure out what would be best. And even, I remember even using like just essential oils because I had headaches. So it was a good combination of a variety of things. So nothing specifically prescribed because, as Liliana mentioned, I didn't even try to go to the doctor because I knew it would be horrible. Trying to get an actual person to tell me what I already knew. So I tried as best as I could, how our parents have taught us, just like figure it out if you aren't able to have a doctor prescribe something.
Liliana, let's talk about your family a little bit. Like you say, you have 3 generations living under the same roof. How was that during the time, those couple weeks of COVID, and now?
Those 2 weeks they actually weren't that bad. I think I was the one that got the worst end of it because I was kind of holding in this huge secret of like, yes, everybody is COVID positive right now, including he was like 2 weeks away from turning 2 at that time. So I was like still just a 1-year-old, and 2 older parents, and then my sister who is a school teacher. And so thankfully at that time she was doing remote teaching, but since she was also very like feeling kind of like the symptoms that you said, like exhausted in a sense, and so I just felt so bad for her. But yeah, so during that time it was just me dealing with making sure that everybody was okay, keeping everybody indoors, which thankfully we have the luxuries of Amazon Prime and Instacart, and I didn't really have to call on anybody for help for those 2 weeks because we just have those little luxuries that we often take for granted. And once we got that negative result, we were able to, kind of move forward. And as far as like celebrations went, still keeping everything outdoors. I mean, still to this day, the only events or, different activities that I take my kid to are all outdoors or indoors with everybody wearing their masks. It is really hard because my kid is amazing at wearing his mask, and he's brave enough to go up to someone, and even though he's not very verbal, like he will go up to someone and be like, what is up with this? So it's so wild to see somebody who has grown up, half of his life during a global pandemic and still kind of navigating that. And it's definitely tough. I miss just like I hadn't seen Raquel in months, and we're usually so tight. But I do miss the whole community element, and also being able to help other people like during those 2 weeks. And then even after, I was kind of afraid to continue to lend a helping hand because I was like, okay, how we weren't able to like trace it back exactly to where we contracted the virus. And I was like, okay, at that time it was when they were talking about how if you have contracted it once, maybe it wasn't that bad, maybe it was a mild case, but if you contracted a second time, it could be a much more serious situation. And so not even thinking about myself, just mostly thinking about my family, I was like, we have to be even a little bit more vigilant than we were before, and although restrictions have, been lifted and like, it seems like everyone's more relaxed. Everyone in my family is thankfully vaccinated except for my now 3-year-old son. So.
Take us back a year or so for you, Raquel. How was the living situation with you and your partner?
Yeah, so with my partner, it was just 2 of us in our household and our dog. And when I did test positive, I remember actually the Southern Nevada Health District called me and said, you have a positive test, and we just wanted to make sure, and like told me all the things that I could do. So I was very thankful to them. So I want to shout them out because those folks have been working nonstop. But as far as my family, we only communicated with one other household, which was my partner's family. And he had his niece, his two sisters, his father and mother, and they all had COVID. And that was the family unit that we communicated in, and like they were taking care of themselves in their home, and I was taking care of myself with my partner at home. And like I said, I'm very thankful that my partner did not test positive for COVID, which is apparently it happens a lot. I've read a lot about a lot of split households where one person gets it and the other one doesn't. Still unsure. I can't wait to see the research. But as far as my immediate family, my mom and dad, they're actually retired and they live in Guatemala where I was born. And truthfully, 2020 was really difficult for me just because I'm here in the United States in a place that arguably has more access to resources and to the vaccine or testing. And my parents usually come up and they stay here for a few months at a time. And they didn't come up in 2020 just because it was just so difficult and traveling. And like my dad had just turned 81 in October. And my mom has asthma. I do not want them traveling. But it was really hard to see just the development of the vaccine and just testing and COVID in general across the globe. And I think it's a unique perspective that not a lot of people understand, of like having your family in another country and seeing them go through that, but also like the privilege that I hold of being here, testing at my fingertips, though 2 hours, but it's still there. You have to pay in other countries to do that. And so I remember when I called my mom and I told her I had COVID, she was immediately in tears, and my dad's a lot more level-headed. So I was trying to get her to understand it's okay, she'll take care of herself. She has resources, she has access, and communicated with my mom daily, letting her know. And, we have a few aunts and uncles that are doctors, and they would tell me what would work too and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like, it is a lonely journey going through COVID, even if you have family, if you have partners. The feelings that you experience are incredibly difficult. So I was very thankful to not only have my partner and his family here, but just my friends too, who delivered groceries when, Amazon wasn't available, and my family being there for moral support via text message, FaceTime, or calls.
Now, Lily, you're a very talented photographer and you do most of your work freelance, but I assume obviously you must have like clients with you. How has your life changed? How do you go about your day-to-day work today, now in November of 2021, as opposed to when you had COVID and before?
So it's now going on, I've missed out on 2, if not like 3, kind of like my biggest money earners, which are like the wedding seasons, which arguably are now just year round. I don't even call it seasons anymore because people just get married on any day. But I've chosen not to do too many weddings because although I have a contract that like I had to draw up a whole new contract of, if you have more than this many guests for this space, I will not feel safe unless I come up in a hazmat suit and photograph your wedding, because at the end of the day, I have to go home to my 3-year-old who is not vaccinated. And so, I got to the point of like telling people like insane amounts of money whenever they would be like, oh, well, it's only going to be, 200 people. And I'd be like, okay, so 200 people, does $20,000 sound good for photographing your wedding? And they'd be like, I don't understand. And I'd be like, it's my kid's health. There really isn't a price for that. And so it has been really sad to have to say no to some really, really cool gigs, weddings, parties, like just so many things, especially Halloween that just passed. Like there are usually like 3 Halloween parties that are really large that I photograph like every year because it's my favorite holiday. But unfortunately this year, because the rules are just more relaxed and all the mandates are very, very relaxed at this point, I still can't go out and do that. But thankfully I still have some really cool clients that have had like small gatherings, for their weddings, a lot of like elopements where, they've taken into consideration the fact that this is still a very serious, life that we're living in. And so it has been cool to get to kind of be a little bit more, creative. But I do definitely miss photographing large events and not having to worry about, just only having to worry about like my equipment and like what I'm doing, and instead of like, did that person next to me just cough and why is their mask off and what's going on? Like, yeah, it's really tough.
And Raquel, you work for a local chapter of a national nonprofit organization. I assume you must see coworkers, see members of the public, see other people sometimes. How are you coping with this at work with COVID?
Yeah, so I actually want to give a shout out to Liliana because before we had COVID, we were actually helping some local nonprofits and we were delivering groceries to Latino households that had tested positive for COVID. And so to me, it's full circle too that we were in the ground on ground zero, I guess, in the community, reaching out and helping folks that had tested positive, and then a few months later we tested positive too. And I say that because when I worked, like as you mentioned, nationally, but I was working regionally for a long time, and we shifted our work a lot to direct aid and community service work, whatever was needed, because we knew that we couldn't go up to, let's say, a volunteer and ask something of them if they were nervous about their household and with restrictions, or they didn't have access to food or resources, or didn't know how to navigate world in a COVID world, right? And so we shifted, and we were really trying to make sure that all of our volunteers and our supporters had what they needed, whether that was groceries, whether that was housing assistance. To this day, I continue seeing, shout out to the folks that are still doing a lot of that work and shifting their work and making sure that when you do go out into the community that you recognize that folks come in with a lot of lived experience and we don't know what's going on, right? Especially with COVID. Yes, thankfully we have elected officials that have chosen to not, to continue mask mandates or to make sure that folks have access to housing, but it's simply not enough. And so folks are still struggling. But seeing people in person, I miss it. I really do. I mean, we are very social people, both of us, and we thrive on that. But at the end of the day, I prefer, much like Liliana said, like being outside, outdoors, if I have to be inside, following the governor's mandate of wearing my mask, making sure that I also tell folks that realistically, like I had COVID too and I was out in the community and it can happen to anybody. It is not fun, even if I'm here and talking about it and I wasn't in the hospital or had a fatality in my family. It's not something that I wish upon anybody. So, now being with folks, most of the people that I'm around, thankfully, they have their mask on, they recognize and they're making an informed decision about the vaccine, and that's what's most important to me.
How about you, Liliana? What do you say? Are you quick with telling people your personal testimony? And what do you tell it sounds like your family is pretty much covered, but friends or acquaintances that maybe are still anti-vax, denying vaccines? What's your message to them?
I just always let them know that, the reason that I can't hang out with them, because that is what I've had to do, is practically cut them out of my life in a very respectful way, just kind of tell them it's not you, it's the fact that you could go around sick, and if my kid gets sick, I mean, that's my world right there, and I wouldn't risk that for a gathering, I wouldn't risk that for a party. It's, I always try to remind them that there are so many people out there that will not be able to get the vaccine. So that includes children, that includes people who have autoimmune diseases, or like their immunity is compromised, and so they can't get this vaccine, and they would be much more likely to just die. And I hate that people are kind of have come to terms with people are going to die of COVID. I mean, in my home country of Mexico, I kind of understand that, because they, like Raquel has said, in Guatemala, they don't have that many resources. So things like testing are not very readily available. Things like being able to isolate when one person gets sick in the family, like, oh, well, maybe we could just go to a different house or something like that. Like, those things are not feasible for people. So in my home country, yeah, I understand that a lot of very impoverished communities, which include some of my own family and friends, are just much more likely to pass away from this ongoing pandemic. But I just refuse to see that in this country. It really doesn't make any sense to me. I try to make it make sense, but it doesn't, because we have so many resources to ensure that we look out for one another, whether that be elderly folks, kids, people who can't get the vaccine. It really is up to each one of us to see our power in getting the shot for others who can't.
You both talked a lot about the Latin culture and how COVID has affected people's attitudes and what they've thought about COVID testing, vaccinations, and everything like that. Clark County, I believe, Clark County University Medical Center, Southern Nevada Health District, have done a decent job of outreaching into the Latin community as far originally for just identifying this problem and testing, and now vaccinations. Is there anything, Raquel, that could be done from the government's perspective or from the public's perspective that could maybe get the message out there a little bit more into the Latin community?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, frankly, just because most of my family were not very hesitant to get the vaccine. They knew right away what we had to do. As you know, Latino communities are very family oriented. So for us, getting a vaccine is not an individual choice. It is an informed choice for our families. And I've said it multiple times that to me, at first it was accessibility, but I think for now it's misinformation and disinformation. There's a responsibility of elected officials and social media channels, in my opinion, to make sure that this type of information doesn't go on to our communities, not just like Latinx families, but also Black families, like white families, API, Indigenous families. And to me, like, to be very sincere, getting a vaccine is a personal choice, but I do want folks to make an informed decision. But what I want also elected officials to recognize is the medical racism and history that particularly people of color have in this country, and understand that it's not just, oh, I'm going to go get a vaccine. It's a lot of hesitancy, because that was medical racism that folks have experienced, and it's like very much still traumatic to people today, even if it didn't happen to them. And so I would love to see a campaign that combats disinformation and misinformation with facts, with historical context of why it is that maybe communities are nervous to do that. I also do want to give a shout out not only to like elected officials and folks, but also like community members who have been meeting the moment where they're at. Examples, right? Like, at swap meets, like having a COVID vaccine there, at churches, and that is quite frankly the work of community organizations, recognizing that there is a gap. So to me, if my message, again, COVID disinformation, but also fund these organizations that know and recognize the needs of communities, because they are actually the community.
Do you have anything that you'd like
Absolutely. No, you took it all out of my mouth. You really did. As always, it really is. I have family members that have actually traveled to the United States to get the vaccine, because they weren't going to be able to receive the vaccine in Mexico for a long time. Like I think still the young people, like the youngest people, it's not that easy to receive the vaccine just yet. Like, it's not accessible. So that's something that I often tell people, like, if my family is willing to travel, to have to make that very long journey. But I actually have an aunt who passed away from COVID in Mexico. It was very early on. And I feel like even though my family still has they have weekly rosaries for her where they honor her and things like that. For a while, my family kind of got a little bit distracted and also kind of started sharing things via WhatsApp and via Facebook that was misinformation and disinformation that had to do with how the vaccine had been researched and who it had been funded by and what was being done. And the only thing that I could remind them of was, she didn't get to receive the vaccine. Like, you really just do it for her at this point. She didn't get that chance, but you guys are now getting that chance.
Well, we certainly do appreciate both of your powerful testimonies. I hope you and your families all get well and everything is just fine. And again, it's very much appreciated. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much to Liliana and Raquel for sharing their COVID testimony with us. COVID-19 testing and vaccination sites are located in many locations in Clark County, including one at UNLV in the parking lot of the Paradise Campus, 851 East Tropicana Avenue, across from the Thomas & Mack. This drive-through site operates Sunday through Thursday from 5:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. It's first come, first served, and of course, vaccinations are safe, effective, and free. Additional vaccination sites, including pharmacies, are found in the Southern Nevada Health District's website at snhd.info/COVID-vaccine, and the public is encouraged to call the state's vaccine hotline at 1-800-401-0946 or go online to nvcovidfighter.org. I'm Randy Swallow. Thanks for watching COVID Conversations on Clark County Television. See you next time.